Very different candidates for Prime Minister with very different pitches, all facing a nation getting impatient with Brexit. The UK is bracing for an early election on the 12th of December, and the result is set to be wildly unpredictable. Prime Minister Boris Johnson is hoping he can win a majority to finally get the deal he struck in Brussels approved by the British Parliament. Meanwhile, the opposition is hoping to thrash the ruling Conservatives and potentially change the terms of the UK's divorce from the EU. But with Brexit fatigue growing across the country, the Labour Party is focusing its pitch on social issues.
People have a chance to vote for real change after years of Conservative and Lib Dem cuts. Privatisation and tax handouts for the richest. This government that's put our NHS into crisis. This election is a once-in-a-generation chance to end privatisation in our NHS, give it the funding it needs and give it the doctors, the nurses, the GPs and all the other staff that it needs.
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson was quick to respond, focusing on his pledge to get Brexit done.
We are going to deliver a fantastic deal by which this country will come out of the European Union. A deal that he has tried to block and that we will deliver. That is the future for this country. Drift and dither under the Labour Party or taking Britain forward to a brighter future under the Conservatives. That is the choice this country faces.
So the battle lines are being drawn, and especially on social media, where the campaigning has really gotten off in earnest. Let's go over to our social media news desk, The Cube, where Alex can tell us more.
Well, Ollie, they may not be knocking on the doors just yet, but they are posting on social media. The parties aiming to win over their votes. And why does this matter beyond the shores of the UK? Well, it matters because this is the Brexit election. Like it or loathe it, this is the Brexit election. And the main issue that led us to this point is Brexit. And it is the parties now trying to set out their stalls on Brexit, I think, which will be the defining issue. The Conservative Party then, very simple. Look at this Twitter post here, this tweet. Only Boris Johnson will break the deadlock and deliver on the priorities of the people. But the key message there, in order to do that, Boris has to get Brexit done. Very much focusing on the person of Boris Johnson and his pledge to deliver Brexit. When it comes to the Labour Party, though, it's worth saying they're trying to get people to vote, but Brexit is not what they want to set this election up to be a discussion about. They want to talk about the social issues. And indeed, look at this, a video from Jeremy Corbyn. It's got around almost 2 million views at this stage about his rise to power, his party's pitch to change the country. Performing very, very well, being shared by the party. They're setting out their stall on other issues. Then you've got the Liberal Democrats saying they're going to stop Brexit. They're going to revoke Article 50 and end Brexit. Then you've got the Brexit Party, a party that was only founded this year, or certainly only became electorally active this year, saying that Brexit, the only way to get it is to vote for them. So, Ollie, if I can sum up where we are at with these things, looking at the messages on social, get Brexit done, Boris Johnson. Liberal Democrats, we're done with Brexit. Brexit Party, Brexit betrayal, vote for us. Labour, please let's talk about anything except Brexit. And the SNP, because of Brexit, we want Skexit. So it's the Brexit election. It's going to be the defining issue. But of course, voters will have other concerns. And the question is, will campaigns like Labour's that move away from that central Brexit question gain ground? Well, here in The Cube, we will be keeping our eyes on social and also fact-checking in what is going to be a highly contentious battle for votes.
Well, a mixed bag, and certainly we've got a long way to go before it really kicks off and gets to that result. But for more, let's head over to London, where our UK correspondent, Vincent McAviney, is standing by for us. So the two main protagonists in this, of course, are going to be UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn. Is it really going to die down to a battle between those two men, or is it going to be a lot more nuanced than that?
Well, Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn have had their final PMQs of this parliamentary term, and for one of those men, it will likely be their last PMQs in their career. And really, British politics at the moment is so divided, and the polls are really kind of all over the place. You cannot really trust the numbers given what happened in 2015, in the 2016 referendum, and the 2017 general election. I think the parties to be watching for are the SNP, which could possibly take all of the seats in Scotland, Ireland and then try and get a second referendum on independence. And the Liberal Democrats are going to split the vote in very interesting ways around this country. It might be that those two parties end up with over 100 MPs combined and they become the kingmakers. So whilst our attention will naturally be focused on Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson, they aren't going to be the main event. This is going to be a really interesting election to see how it plays out.
Now, apart from Brexit, what are the other big things, the big themes that we're going to hear from those politicians?
Well, we got a foretaster of that in PMQs. In Jeremy Corbyn's main exchange with Boris Johnson, he didn't raise Brexit once. It was all about one issue, the NHS, the British healthcare system. And Jeremy Corbyn was relentless in his attacks on Boris Johnson on that. Boris Johnson did come slightly unstuck in replying to that. And I think we're going to be hearing less about Brexit. I think for Labour, for them, they're just going to say, yeah, we'll give you a second referendum and then try to talk about other stuff. For the Liberal Democrats, they're saying we're a party of Remain and then talk about other stuff. The attempt is to try to move on and talk about other issues. And one thing that did stand out for me from Jeremy Corbyn, I think we're going to be hearing a lot from Labour on this, is that Boris Johnson is doing some kind of special deal with Donald Trump. That is going to be a big threat that they're going to use in this campaign.
Vincent McAviney joining us from outside the Palace of Westminster there. Well, now let's cross over to Brussels where we can speak to Darren McCaffrey. Darren, can you help us understand the bigger picture of all this? What does this election mean for the UK's relationship with the EU moving forward?
Well, fundamentally, of course, this election has come about because the UK Parliament is so fractured, so divided on the main national issue in Britain, that of how it should exit the European Union. As European politicians will routinely point out, we all know what the UK Parliament is against, but we don't know in what it wants to see, what it is in favour of. And for a large part, that is the reason that this election is happening, in the hope not just from the EU, but indeed from Boris Johnson and other UK politicians, that somehow this Brexit deadlock can be unlocked in December. The question, of course, though, Oliver, is can it be? Is the country still so divided? Is this Parliament in many ways a reflection of those divisions within the country, that we could end up yet again in a hung Parliament situation with politicians unable to agree? But also be in no doubt, as Vinny was suggesting, this will be an election where Brexit will play a big part, like it did in 2017, but it may not be the defining issue. Because, as Vinny was also suggesting, the opposition party, Labour, are determined to make this election about anything else than Brexit. And it must be said that many of the British public may well agree with that. There is an awful lot of Brexit fatigue in the United Kingdom. Voters are bored of hearing about it. They want the UK government to focus on other big issues, whether it be healthcare, whether it be education, whether it be crime. And if the election becomes about things that aren't Brexit, well, that's when things might get really interesting. That's when the opposition may well have a chance. And despite Boris Johnson being somewhat of a good campaigner, this could be a very tricky and a very tight election that could produce very unpredictable results.
Well, it'll be very interesting to see, Darren, whether they do diverge, the Conservatives, that is, from their Brexit message. Darren McCaffrey joining us from Brussels.